with this, we would move on to our panel discussion by leaders in the school education, and they would be talking about the national education policies impact on school education, and how challenging will it be for schools and students. Join me in welcoming Mr. Amol Arora, who is the Vice Chairman, Shemrock and Sanfort Group of School. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Amol Arora. And we're also joined by Dr. S.K. Rathor, Founder and Managing Director, Sanfort Group of Schools. Thank you, Dr. Rathor, for joining us. And we are also joined by Dr. Kavita Aggarwal, Chairperson, Members of International Schools Association. Thank you, Dr. Kavita, for joining us. And we also have Dr. Chandrashekar, who is the CEO of JGI Schools, I think from Telangana. And I would also welcome Reekrit Serai, the Managing Director for Satluj Group of Schools. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Serai. And of course, Anirudh Gupta, Chief Executive Officer of DCM Group of Schools. I would a warm welcome to all the eminent speakers and panelists. Now I would request Mr. Arora to moderate the session. Over to you, Mr. Arora.
Thank you, Sudhir. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for inviting all of us for this discussion. And it was good hearing the speakers before us on the NEP. And of course, a lot of discussion has happened in the past few months because this was a policy document after 1986. This is the next policy document which determines how education will go forward in the years ahead. So I think there's been a lot of discussion in terms of the good things, the challenges. And since we have a panel with us today, which is who are the ground operators who are practically running schools, are interacting with teachers, children on a day-to-day basis, it'll be good to hear what their thoughts and feelings are, and also how do they see schooling change. Because from the audience perspective, I know the audience will be mostly school leaders and teachers, and they have big concern. Ultimately, what does it mean for me as an educator or for my school? So we'll try and keep our discussion around that, more practical aspects as opposed to what the NEP is, because I think everybody has read it and we've discussed it at multiple forums. So I think I'm looking forward to this panel discussion in which we are going to talk about what it means for you as an educator in the NEP and how things might change. So straight away, I'd like to start with the ladies first. Dr. Kavita, when you read the NEP, how did you envisage that things would change? Or do you think, what's your role? Are you an optimist? Are you a pessimist about government policy? And of course, good intent versus bad implementation. We've always had these discussions. So what's your reaction to this, and how do you think things will move going forward?
Thank you, Mr. Arora, and thank you, APAC, for organizing such a fantastic meet where we can share our knowledge and expertise. Mr. Arora, as you have asked me that how do I feel about it, and how do my education fraternity feel about the new policy? As you all are aware that I belong to a group of people, community, which is Cambridge, which is international board. And I represent that community where there are 110 schools. They are all Cambridge schools. So when we take this policy, we all welcome it with great joy and pleasure, because the policy is quite similar to the practices what we are doing now. So in terms of our pedagogy, in terms of our assessments, it's in terms of academic structure. So it is absolutely there is a lot of similarity in that. So for international education, I don't think that there is going to be much of a change. But yes, overall, when the school functioning is there, so I feel that there are going to be some challenges. So I take the entire scenario with some principles of management, that is planning of the entire academic structure, which also incorporates preschool education. So we have to do a lot of backward planning, that what is expected in grade 1 has to be the descending with grades, the senior kg and the junior kg and nursery. So it has to be connected. So that planning has to be done. Now secondly, apart from planning, a lot of resources have to be planned, because now new education policy talks a lot about skills development. Now skills development, where we take about with the Indian boards, we have to involve our stakeholders, that is students and the parents, all into major part of skill development. The skills which are life skills also, and which are technical skills, vocational skills, which is going to give some kind of a bread butter in the future. Now also we would also like to talk about teacher training. So teacher training is the biggest aspect, where it is very, very much challenging, that teachers have to be equipped to plan the entire curriculum, to execute entire curriculum, to evaluate entire curriculum, and also take the feedback very, very positively. So resources are also major concern over here, because many schools are lacking short of funds, and in this especially COVID scenario, the school sector has hit terribly. It is it's getting very difficult for the school managements to actually manage the school's day-to-day recurring expenditures. So taking the resources together, where the IT infrastructure is a major need of the hour, because we all see that the future is going to be blended learning. Now we are so much into the online or the digital learning, so we always now our future and our future planning will not depend on the blended learning. So that is also one big challenge with us. Of course, the challenge is with as I said, infrastructure, academics. So my teachers, what should be the qualification for the teachers who are teaching in preschool and grade 1? What should be the timings of the teacher from preschool to grade 1? What should be the pay scale for the teachers for grade preschool to grade 1? These are all teething problems, and these are all the question marks which everybody has there in mind, that what are we supposed to do, and what kind of a teacher to be hired for this particular foundational years. So these are the few things which would, and next I would like to highlight about the mother tongue. Now, when we talk about English medium schools, so mother tongue, it's a mindset. It's a mindset totally. The teachers and the school has to bring about the mindset of the parents, that mother tongue is the best option in the preschool years, and later on they can gradually enfold the medium of instruction English into that. So these are the few teething problems, and the most important challenge is changing the overall mindset of the transdisciplinary approach of the students and the parents, because right now it's a tunnel vision. I have to take these subjects and go into this. I have to take these subjects and go into this. So this mix and match and coming over to the change is a big challenge for the schools as well as the educators, and also for the child, that yes, you can get into the transdisciplinary approach, you find your interest, you find your own vocation, and the sky is a limit for you. And the last I would like to say, that education policy is wonderful document. If it is implemented in a right way, it's going to be 100% successful, and we all are happy that we all are coming at the same page. But one request to the entire education fraternity and the government is also, keep education sector away from political domain, then it is going to be successful. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kavita. I think the last line, of course, has a lot of weight, and especially for those of us who are in the following national boards policies like the CCE, and we've seen that happen where policy and politics get mixed up. So Roshan, I'd like to ask you the next question. The one thing Dr. Kavita mentioned was very interesting. He said the schools right now are facing a crisis in the middle of something where we have to fight the stakeholders. The parents are not paying fees, dharnas, ministers trying to be very populist. So and right now in the middle of sudden this short-term crisis, which because we know ultimately things will go back to normal one day, hopefully as soon as possible. This is NEP document which talks about far-reaching consequences. How are schools looking at this? Are they like छोड़ो यार वो बाद में देखेंगे, अभी तो let's just focus on managing, surviving this thing. How are schools taking it? And then how as a group of schools are you looking at what NEP changes? Because now you have to look at as a leader looking at managing change right now, ensuring survival, ensuring that our children keep learning in the middle of all this uh, lack of funds. And on the other hand, you're supposed to look at, be a visionary and think, okay, how is NEP going to impact our schools? So how are you addressing this situation, especially with these two big developments that have happened, the COVID and NEP in the last few months?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Amol, for the question. Really good question. And I think, I mean, you're right, all schools are facing a crisis for obvious reasons. Although what I would say, at least in our experience, is that we were in this crisis mode for several months, no doubt about it, right? From March through to maybe September, we could say. But I think, after a while, when you're constantly in the mode of crisis, it stops feeling like a crisis because you get used to it. So everyone's kind of used to handling that situation.
Hashtag new normal.
Yeah. I mean, the new normal is real. So the crisis is normalized, and suddenly we know there's a crisis going on, but it doesn't feel like a high tension, high stress crisis in a very direct way anymore. It did for a long time, for sure, but that feeling has faded. And also, we had to settle into new patterns of administration. We had to make a lot of new policies related to HR and all sorts of things. And, we had to replan the financials considering less fee income was coming in. But all that really hard, intense crisis work has kind of been done. And now we're flowing in that new mode. And I think that's an experience talking to other school leaders that a lot of school leaders share. So actually, if anything, this has become almost a perfect time for thinking to the future and thinking about reform. So it's not the case that, okay, baad mein dekhenge and all of that. Actually, this is the perfect time to think about it. We have a bit of bandwidth to do that now. And in fact, normally when the school is running in full swing, for example, the principals of the school are absolutely occupied in day-to-day issues of the school and the administration and, everything from the infrastructure to rowdy parents coming to the school to complain about this or that or whatever it might be. And now, the principals are they're finding that they're able to engage more with teaching and learning than they normally did because, they have multiple laptop screens open in their office and they're observing lots of classes and they're going between them and they're then, debriefing with the teachers after that. So they're spending a lot more time connected with the teaching and learning process, almost reminding themselves, why was it that they went into teaching in the first place? Because otherwise they've been distracted by all this administration and all of that burden. Which comes with being a principal. So really engaged with these ideas and working together to think to the future. Now, specifically on the NEP, I mean, look, in general, I've said on many panel discussions already, NEP is great vision document, lots of nice ideas, not much in there which we couldn't have been thinking about doing anyway. It's not like now this NEP has said we do these things, so we should do them all. And what's more, there are, of course, specific policy interventions which we are looking forward to. But as of now, they're still theoretical, right? There's not been a policy document to follow up the NEP to say this is how it's going to be implemented. So when we see that the NEP is looking towards making exams less based on rote learning, great, fantastic. We welcome it. It'll create all the space to do more skills-based learning. But they haven't actually followed up yet on telling us exactly how that's going to be and what that's going to look like and when that's going to happen. So we're not in a great position to immediately plan for that yet. So we're just, working in our own way to improve pedagogy as much as possible. Surely a lot of that will probably be in line with the NEP anyway. We want to introduce skills and competency-based learning in our schools. That's something we've been thinking about doing for a while, and now we have the support of the NEP. Great. And so we're working together to really introduce true blended learning systems so that we're going to have actual, kind of e-learning time during main class periods. So that's something really exciting that's happening. Working on a lot of other initiatives, starting from the teacher training level, to make sure that we really have a collaborative practice in classrooms, that we really develop critical thinking in students. We've taken a lot of inspiration from Michael Fullan's 6 C's of skills base. So it's communication, collaboration, critical thinking, citizenship. I always struggle to name all 6 when I'm put on the spot, but you get the idea. And we're working really nicely across our schools that different principles will be.
You can just say 21st century skills and shorten it, right?
Yeah, sure. If you want to do that, and different principles across our schools are taking each of these in a different way, and then we're kind of collaboratively learning across our schools from each other, making these sort of professional learning communities across schools, so that the learning gathered in one can then be transferred to another, and all of that. So really exciting time for making progress. With or without, we're not waiting for the NEP implementation to catch up. We're just getting on with improvement regardless of the NEP.
Thank you, Roshan, for sharing that. Chandra, what's been how are your schools managing this? It's interesting to hear Roshan's insights into how his schools are. And I think a lot of schools like yours also are innovative and already doing it, as Roshan said. It's not that NEP came and that's when innovation starts. No, we need to do holistic learning. Okay, we didn't know that earlier, right? So we all know that. And of course, as Roshan, you said, I mean, these words, we talk about holistic learning, the need to do away with coaching classes. It's easier said than done. How will assessments happen? How will college entrance examinations happen? As long as the entrance exam is the same, if the question is the same, the answer is going to be always the same. Just saying that I want to change the answer without changing the question is always, it's a very difficult task. So Chandra, how's your experience been, and how have you managed the short term and long term, these two matters that have come, COVID and NEP? I'd love to hear. I think I'm sure other school leaders would also want to hear what you've been doing, and perhaps learn going forward how to manage in the next few months, and how have you approached this whole situation?
Thank you, Amol, and good morning to all of you. It's nice to connect with all of you on this panel once again, and thanks to APAC for putting this together. Now, personally for me, I have a kind of a mixed approach towards NEP. Of course, nothing to take away from the document, that it is quite a visionary document, very well compiled in terms of modern ideas for education, and it's better late than never in that context. But as I said, I have a mixed feeling about NEP, and maybe I can use the word slightly disappointed from the point of view of private schools. And why do I say disappointed is, as Roshan already mentioned, and even Dr. Kavita said, that there are certain things which are already going on in private schools. And NIP is kind of reiterating them at a scale and in a more defined manner. But with that being said, where the disappointment really comes in is, see, it's easier to say that you include vocational education into the curriculum. But what happens is the guidelines to including it. How are we going to do it, and what is going to be measured if we are going to include? Because it's not a one stick measures all kind of an approach. You have to be very specific about it. I want to compare between Cambridge boards or the IB board or even the CBSE certain things. Now what happens is, the policy is very good when you say, okay, this is what you need to do. But the real problem comes in what of the policy needs to be measured, how it is going to be measured, and who is to implement it, and what are the ways to do it. Now, these specifications are missing. Of course, there should be a follow-up document, there should be something coming out, and I cannot agree more when Roshan says this is the right time. Yes, the schools are going through a crisis. Of course, we are struggling to make things happen the way it used to happen last academic year, because the new normal has brought in a lot of challenges. We have learned to survive, and we are trying to survive every passing day, because different states have different ways to look at the crisis. Newspapers speak about the rising numbers, news channels talk about the reducing numbers, government is not talking anything about the numbers. So the whole thing is like, everything out there, if you go out to the street, everything appears to be normal, but as far as our world is concerned, nothing is normal. It's like a crisis within a crisis. because COVID is engulfed the planet, but we educators are in another nutshell, which is a part of the planet, but it has no clue about outside world, what they are thinking about us, and we don't know what's going to happen for the next 6 months. So the idea here is we need to be very careful about what are we going to implement and how are we going to implement, because I think that guidance document will take some more time from the authorities to come in. So as private schools, we need to not bite more than what we can chew and try to do certain things which are essential to our DNA. So let me give you an example. So I spoke about vocational education. This has been a part of our project or our DNA for the last 10 years, because we developed that particular model very integrated, very much integrated to our mainstream curriculum. So when we do that, we have modules how vocational education can be integrated. In fact, we have the Jain Institute of Vocational and Advanced Studies, which rolls out these things, and we integrate that into our school curriculum. Today, as I speak, in our university, Jain University, we have 25,000 students, but everybody has to go through a program or a module on entrepreneurship, the program on AI, program. So these are common things, common subjects. So the idea here, what I'm trying to get at is in schools as well as in colleges, we need to rope in that and take specific actions to make things happen. The best part what NEP has done is, at least today, parents, teachers, principals, and others in the ecosystem cannot say, why are you forcing us to do all this when the curriculum or the syllabus does not tell us to do? At least that way you can say the NEP document is already there and it is clearly put in black and white that these are the futuristic things which can be implemented, and the government is thinking of implementing it in schools which are owned by state. We as a private entity should be leading the change. So the idea is there, but then I would still look for options where we can have implementable steps to go forward. So that is what I would like to tell Amol.
Yes, thank you. I think good point. At least the NEP aligns us all as a country on the same lines, and I think we've been discussing that it's the challenge is also, as you said, what vocational is about, the mindset of people also, and of course there is the practical aspects. I mean, as a school, how do you run a school if 2 kids want one subject and 3 kids want some weird subject, and it'll become a mess in managing the timetable of such a school. And is it feasible? Then it comes down to economics as well. Is it viable to do that as a school, as a private school? Somebody has to pay for that, and ultimately you can't just increase the fees because there are 3 kids in a class and who want to learn AI, and I'm going to how do you manage that? So Dr. Rathor, come to you now. What's your thing on how optimist or pessimist are you about the NEP? What's your reaction, and how do you see it being implemented, especially in the early childhood education? How do you see it happening? Because now they're saying that early childhood would age of 3. So is that a good thing? Because we do take 2-year-olds in our preschools also. So, or is it something which is going to be, do you appreciate the fact it's coming into the limelight, or do you think this is going to be something which should have maybe gone down till age of 2? And also with the Right to Education Act also coming into preschools, is that something that will really stifle the growth of this sector?
Thank you, Amol. And as every speaker is having some optimistic things and some pessimistic. So similarly, everybody in the education sector has some negative things about this NEP or implementation mechanism. See, what I feel in our country, we prepare a very beautiful document for everything. Document speaks a lot to do for the this NEP document speaks a lot to do in the education sector. But how much we would be we miss the complete education fraternity. I'm not talking about the private sector only. The complete education system is how much the complete education system would be able to implement it. See, whatever this document speaks, I think most of the reputed private players are already doing that. If we talk about use of technology, if we talk about vocational, many of the formal schools are already doing this kind of exercises. My only issue is there are lots of regulations in the education sector, in every sector. I feel there should be less regulation, more implementation, more freedom should be given to the education leaders and institutions to implement this document. One thing. Second thing, if I talk about preschool education, which you Amol are also expert in that field. See, preschool education, if I talk about Shemrock or Sanfort or Kidji or any, you take any name, all the people are doing what this document says for decades. One thing. Second thing, if I talk about the age criteria, the 3 years of the age was, mentioned for last many years by the government document. हम लोग पिछले कई सालों से and many of the places we have faced challenges also from the government bodies. Why you are taking at the age of 2? So if I talk about the age to enter into early childhood education should be 2 years, not 3, because the child, everybody knows the children are very smart today. Today's children are not like me. हमारे जैसे नहीं है कि हम लोग जो फॉर्मल स्कूल में सीधा गए और हम लोगों का वो जो मेंटल लेवल और वो सब था. Today's child is very smart. They are more active. So we need to channelize their energies at the age of 2 or lesser than 2, because, and it is the requirement of parents also today. Because if I talk about metro cities, most of the couples are working. So where the child should go for the active learning. If they send the child to just a simple crèche, the child should not learn anything. Will not learn anything. And if the child is kept with the maid at home, even then child didn't do any positive kind of exercises. So the age should be 2, but it is mentioned 3 earlier also and in this document also. Another thing is what I understood from the earlier speakers, विश्वजीत साहू साहब भी बोल रहे थे और अनिल स्वरूप जी. So the kind of teachers training we have, we all are facing a major problem in finding good teachers at early childhood centers, because there is no such training mechanisms there. Only the certifications are happening and no training is happening. So what I feel, regulations should be reduced from the government side, and this government should focus on the implementation mechanism. There should be a good implementation mechanism first for the teacher training, for early childhood education, for the B.Ed, for the M.Ed, whatever teacher trainings are there in our country, that should be proper training institutes should be there, not only certificate issuing institutes. This is my take on this, and I believe if the complete education fraternity come together, we can implement this document very well, and most of us sitting on the panel are doing it many years. Yeah, Amol.
Yes, thank you for those points. I think that's true. In terms of, I think we're all coming at that in terms of philosophy, I think we all agree that we've all been doing it. And so Reekrit, my next question to you now, how are you managing these two sudden changes in education system, and how do you see schools change as a result of these COVID? And talked about that schools education will be hybrid going forward, and you understand tech very well as well, so I know that. So how are you visualizing now the role of, there's a third element now I'd like to add on for yours, just make your question a bit harder. Technology, COVID, and NEP now. How do you see these three, forces change school education? I mean, that's a big question on, I think, everybody's mind in the audience. So I'd love if you could address that.
Yeah, wonderful question. Thank you, Amol. This is a pleasure. This is a pleasure to be a part of the panel, of course, and then we've spoken at various forums in the last few months as well, and then we've spoken about NEP actually. But I'm happy to be amongst friends, and then I'm happy to talk about the crisis that all education institutions are going through at this point of time. Well, I think that the last few months have been they've particularly been the same for like all of us. I think that all of us have gone through ups and downs, and we've particularly been thrown into the deep end of the ocean, and then we've been asked to swim, and it hasn't been easy, of course. Roshan also spoke about this. There were various financial up and downs as well, and Roshan and I had a word about this like a few months ago as well, particularly the fee issue in various parts of the country. But like it's surprising to understand, that the regulatory bodies expect education institutions to function in a particular way without giving them much support, and if not support, and like even elbow room. So I think the NEP, if you particularly see in this case, I think the NEP has turned out to be one of those measures that where education institutions in various ways are particularly trying to be, like from various ends at least, they are being restricted in functioning. I think it's just a very wonderful approach, but I think practically a lot of the points mentioned aren't that feasible. Now, one particular point that I read about just a few days ago, and someone spoke to me about this from my team, was that the revised report cards, which are particularly going to be recommended from the education department, will have peer assessment, will have faculty assessment, and will have self-assessment. It sounds all rosy, it sounds all fun, but particularly how do we keep a check on that? So there are certain impractical measures that I see in the NEP, that I think have been put in there for the sake of being put in there, but there has to be a better action plan in terms of education, because education is one of the priorities if India has to become a superpower in the next few decades at least. Particularly, these are my views on the NEP. There was one very, very interesting aspect about the NEP that I think uh, very few panel talks have really touched upon, and that's the fact that the government has set a target of bringing around 20 million students back into the education system, particularly the K-12 education system, within the next 10 to 15 years. That practically means that if you want to bring 20 million students back into the education system, and if you also want to achieve a gross enrollment ratio of 50% in higher education within the next 15 years, you've got to open 15 new schools per week, and you've got to open one university every week. That is practically impossible. That is absolutely impossible given the current growth rate that we have in the education industry, and given the fact that regulatory bodies aren't really supportive in terms of opening new educational institutions, given the red tapeism that we face. So these are just one or two instances that I feel that the NEP just that the draft committee that particularly worked on the NEP, I think that they haven't thought through some of these points. But of course, the other points in terms of vocational education, in terms of holistic education, I think these are very, very relevant points. And as Dr. Rathor also said, as other panelists also spoke about as well, I think that many of the top schools, and particularly the school chains, have been working on these points for the last few years. Now, coming back to your question about tech, I think the last few months have been an absolute boon for tech. Luckily, I had invested in a few tech startups in the past, but a few of them went bust till last year. But if they had survived till this year, of course, then I'm sure that they would have done well. But yes, this is the time of edtech. All of the edtech startups in different parts of the world, I think that they are enjoying this accelerated growth that they have dreamt of. I mean, this is even beyond what they could have even dreamt of. I feel. I mean, I have seen growth rates of around 10 to 20x within a span of 1 to 2 months as well. So it's been tough. It's been tough for it's been tough for schools. It's been tough for higher education institutions, but it's been good for edtech. It's been good for the coaching industry. It's been it's been good for the ancillary industry in terms of education as well. But I think school managements have suffered the most. So I hope that things are clear over the next few months. I don't see schools opening until at least the vaccine is everywhere. So we still expect April to June of next session, and particularly if you look at preschools, I definitely don't see them opening at least for like even beyond that as well. But it's been tough, but the worst seems to be over. So fingers crossed for next year now.
Yeah, thank you, Reekrit. Some good points raised there in terms of, so I think you're talking about edtech companies and of course the school fraternity, who's the audience here, has been looking at this, watching at the sidelines where they're realizing these 10x, 10 to 20x growth in edtech companies. And so Roshan, how, I'd like to ask you, were you a bit disappointed at what Reekrit also said, the lack of support for the private sector? It's not very clear apart from education should not be commercialized, and were you expecting a more revolutionary, some support for the private sector? Because it's not clear where do we stand in the whole scheme of things. It seems like one holistic document which works for all states, government, private, innovative schools, alternative schools, homeschool. It's like one thing which fits all. Is there something that you would have expected more support for private educators who as Mr. Rathor also said, we need some elbow room and we need some flexibility to be. Is there a lack of trust? Are we still stuck in that education as a non-profit? Is that something that you advocate, that maybe the NEP could have allowed some for-profit, some return on capital that we invest in education, whether it comes for foreign universities or for schools or for, because on the other hand, the private players like Byju's and all these apps, they have no such restrictions. They have a free for all, and we are constrained by so many regulations. They don't have regulations. So are we, where do you see, would you have expecting some support as a private sector? And do you, second thing is, as Reekrit said, this party that's happening for the edtech at our expense in a way, do you think this is sustainable, or do you think once schools go back to normal, it'll be like it'll only be a small part of it? How do you see this playing over the long run now?
Yeah, I mean, definitely we needed more support for the private sector. It's a big disappointment. In fact, I wouldn't use the word support for the private sector. It's more that existing education policy is pretty anti-private sector. And all we need is just to withdraw that. We don't need any active support or any kind of, active intervention in our favor. We just need to stop the interventions which are against us, right? I mean, the fact that there is this regulation that private schools have to be not-for-profit, all is required is a removal of that regulation. And if the sector plays out with normal market forces, those who are providing quality will survive and thrive and grow, and those who are not providing quality, the parents will withdraw their children from there. There's so much work that has been done by academics, by thought leaders, by think tanks, by following the example of successful education systems around the world on how policy could have been made to really fix the deep structural problems in Indian education and kind of recognize the role of the government sector and the private sector in parallel. And there could have been, it's such a missed opportunity to do all of that. I mean, talking about all these wonderful ideas for education, great. But as we said, the good private schools are kind of already doing that anyway. And the government schools don't have the basics in place that will enable them to even think about doing those things. I mean, when you've got schools, you've got children sitting in school for 8 years and they come out being unable to read and write, there's nothing happening. Teachers are not turning up, so shouldn't you fix that first? I mean, there's such a deep problem of accountability in government education. The new education policy does not mention the word accountability once in the entire 64 pages, right? So yeah, it's a great missed opportunity to really harness the power of private education and to empower government education structurally at the same time, and have these two players kind of working in an integrated ecosystem. Then all of that is missed. So it's a great shame. When it comes to edtech, really interesting to see this boom in edtech that has happened during these past few months. The sector has really been taking off. Hard to predict right now whether that's a bubble that's going to burst, or whether it's a symptom of COVID-19, or whether it's here to stay. I think there are certainly some signs of bubbles being formed. I mean, if you look at, I don't want to name particular products, and I've worked with various ed tech companies in various capacities, but there are certain very large, well-known products which have really got very high valuations, doing very successfully in the market. And yet, you look at the quality of the actual product offering, and it's really very basic and very limited. And it's kind of flourishing because of really, really effective marketing and sales strategy, rather than actual, product strategy. So that's a problem which I think is gonna, sooner or later, parents are gonna catch up to that problem. The other thing is that now, everyone, if I look at my LinkedIn profile, every single person in my newsfeed these days seems to be starting up an ed tech company. And even the investors now, although there's lots going into the sector, I'm seeing the investor community is now holding back on giving seed investment to smaller edtech startups now, and are just kind of focusing on giving bigger investments to established or larger prospects. So
edtech is the new Bitcoin as well. Like if you see, like I particularly think that medtech is the new Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, right? EdTech is the new Bitcoin. It's a fad, it's popular. Everyone is wanting to pump money in it, but no one knows where it's going, and no one knows what the real valuation is going to be a few years out. So,
Roshan, these are the same people who were minting Bitcoins in January, making sanitizers in April, and now start EdTech companies.
Quite possibly.
Yesterday, I got an image on WhatsApp. There's this coding company for pregnant women. So they're saying, before your baby gets delivered, we start teaching him coding, right? So deliver.coder.com. Yeah.
So it's ridiculous. And of course, in amongst all of that noise, there are good companies providing good services, good quality products that can really enhance education. And that's great. But, that they're existing amongst all of this noise. And so the sector more widely, we have to wait and see what it's doing. But yeah, I mean, on the whole, I'm actually a big proponent of EdTech, introducing a lot of EdTech in our schools as well. But just looking at the sector as a whole, it's very interesting phenomenon what's going on right now.
Thanks, Roshan, for sharing that. Chandra, I'd like to come to you with this question as well about, we're talking about the government school sector, and it's lacking the basic things where there is no teacher, there are no toilets for girls. And on top of that, the diversity of India, which talks about, cutting edge edtech products, integration, hybrid learning. Do you see the NEP acting as a restrictor in some ways because it's trying to achieve too much? And we know government's track record as well. Of course, the NEP this time seems to have revitalized the government sector. We've heard Dr. Saha speak. We've had people from NCRT all pumped up and ready to go. But is this? Do you think this is going to be the NEP is a bit trying to bite off more they can chew, because, and one is of course implementation. It's also about the funds as well. I mean, Reekrit talked about the GER, gross enrollment ratio, even in early childhood education, it's very, very low right now. So do you think it's a situation of NEP trying to bite off more than they can chew, or is it, do you think, at least as you said, there is one, unifying document which we all need to have as a country, otherwise we're all going in different directions? Or do you think going in different directions is a good thing, because every parent should have choice on what kind of schooling or education my child wants? So where are you on that, and how do you think this NEP, tech, and COVID actually will also, same question again also at the end, how do you see tech really impacting schooling going forward?
Yeah, Amol, I would like to take off from where I left last time. I think the way I look at the document, the NEP document, particularly from the context of the government schools. So first part of the question is that The way I look at it is, I don't think they are trying to bite off more than what they can chew, but rather I would rather put it this way, that they are trying to get more value for the rupee spent. Because see, yes, 6% GDP and that kind of allotment, and it's never going to happen. That conversation can be parked for a while, but look at the current status as it is. The government schools in the states and in the center, which are run and funded by the government, they are quite well funded in terms of the salary aspect of the teacher. Let me only look at that. I mean, a government school teacher is not paid less by any standard. They are paid well. Now the question here is, are they doing quality work for that salary? The accountability part, the part of delivery. So that, I think, the government is trying to address through the NEP document, saying that, listen, we are going to give you what we are supposed to give you, but you are supposed to do what you're supposed to do. And now there is a policy to say that this is what you're supposed to do, and that's the reason you should be looking at doing it. I think that is the perspective or the line of thought the policy drafters have taken, in my opinion, in terms of creating a NEP document, especially for the government perspective.
But as if you heard, Roshan did a Control F search on the document for the word accountability. He could not find that word. Where do you see that coming in, that accountability?
I mean, of course, I have not done the search, but I'll go with Roshan's wisdom here. If the accountability document word is not there, definitely it is missing. But I think the ideology behind the NEP is to ensure that the teachers are more accountable and more value for money is, or the rupee spent is derived out of this. That's what I
so you believe throwing more money at a broken system won't make it work better? So already it's a broken system, so that's not going to solve it. You think this is the better way to solve what is perhaps a problem which we've never been able to solve since independence, right?
No, I think that is true, because see, the reason, if you look at really the reason, if you call it a broken system, is because it's not just the processes. The processes are not just the ones which are broken. It is also a lot of other factors like the attitudinal, the behavioral, the whole idea of what am I supposed to do now that I am here, from the perspective of either a headmaster or a teacher or a principal in the government school. Because the idea here is there is a little bit of entitlement or a lot of entitlement which comes to them the minute they are on the campus. So it's like, okay, we are meant to be here, so nobody is really asking us questions anymore. Whatever I want, I can do and get away. That is really the problem. I think in that context, if this policy can be looked at through that lens, I think maybe some amount of accountability, some amount of cleaning up the whole brokenness can happen, or fixing the brokenness can happen. That's one part of it. Now, the second part, which
can I just add, I think one thing they should remove is maybe having teachers man the election booths, because as long as that happens, the teachers union is too powerful to try and for us to break that. I mean, as long as the teachers union says that you take pangas with us, this is what's going to happen, then
absolutely
politicians are the way the system is designed is incentivized for them to look at the next election as a goal and not for what happens in the country 20 years from now.
No, that's a good thing, and in fact, it's very coincidental that you raised that point. This morning, I was reading the paper, and a few group of teacher unions were telling that open up the schools from the second week of December. And to that, I don't want to name anyone, but the sitting officer in the government here mentions or replies, completely brushing aside the issues. He says, I am presently on election duty, and opening up the schools by end of December is a far possibility. It may not happen. So the question was, open it up by second week of December, and the reply was, even by end of December it won't be opening. Once I resume my duty after election duty, we will discuss with the chief minister and get back by January. Now, rest everything, what's going to happen to schools, what's going to happen to the students, what's going to happen to the current situation for the next 30 days, it's up to you. It's up to your assumptions or imagination. So since you brought that up, yes, that's a big issue. And if you look at India, elections are happening somewhere or the other around the year. Okay, around the year, especially like for us in Jain Group, we are operating in 9 states today. sometimes it gets tough to wrap my head around as to why somebody is on leave today when it's supposed to be a working day. It's not a government holiday. It is not a national declared gazetted holiday, but still people have different reasons by saying that, no, this is the thing, I'm not able to do my job, which I'm appointed for, but I'll be doing something else because I'm supposed to do that now.
Right. Thank you, Sanjay. Dr. Kavita, I'd like to come to you now. And in terms of now that you started off the discussion today, and again, coming back to the NEP, and especially as you said for international schools, do you see the NEP coming in trying to regulate the international curriculums as well, or do you see that? How do you see this play out? Because there might be two different directions which may be given. One is the NEP saying that you have to do this and this is this. Do you see it being applied to international schools in a way in terms of board examinations, assessments, or do you think, because that's an area which is not very, very clear right now, does it, how will the interplay of a curriculum which is designed abroad with its own assessments, its own key stages and everything, how will it integrate with this? Or do you think India will have to create, the international curriculums will have to create something which will become an amalgamation of both these things? How do you see this play out for international schools? You're muted right now. And that's the most common sentence we hear in our classes every day. You're on mute. Please unmute yourself.
I think it's a big time confusion. When we look at international education sector, we have set pattern, we have set department like CPP, lower secondary, IGCSE, A level, then EYP program, then PYP program, then MYP program. We have set programs, and it is coming from different board, the international board. Now, if we compare it with the Indian NEP, it's not matching. The structure is not matching. Maybe the curriculum is same. Maybe the physics is going to remain physics, chemistry, math. But the way it has been presented, it's very different. And it's a very big question mark in everybody's mind that how are we going to cope up with these two different structures? Suppose the child is studying in PYP program, and he gets transferred and he comes to a place where he has to take admission in grade 2. So in national board, he is in foundation years. So the curriculum is different, the academic pedagogy is different, the structure is different, and there's going to be a lot of confusion in terms of leaving transfer certificates. These are the grassroots problems. Now also regarding the boards, so like Cambridge is giving board exam in 10th, in 12th, in 11th and 12th, all three classes. But here in NEP, they are talking about scrapping the board exam in grade 10, and straight away there is an examination in grade 12 where there is a continuous assessments or semester-based assessment is there. In this board with the 12th standard boards. So again, there is a question mark that how to match these two structures together and run the program. So I feel that with NEP, there is going to be we require a real clarification, and our regional directors or the boards have to directly communicate with the authorities that how are you going to match these two academic structures. Otherwise, children and the teachers both are going to be at great confusion and loss, because the pedagogy is different, assessments are different, the curriculum approach, aims and objectives are different. By and large, NEP has adopted quite a lot of things from international sector in terms of skill development, in terms of pedagogy, in terms of assessment, in terms of transdisciplinary approach, but this kind of a structure still has to be clarified, and we don't know how we are going to cope up with it. So let's see, wait and watch. Some clarity will come when the implementation document is released.
Yeah, I think because, as I said, with the country as diverse as India, we have I think the government has bigger challenges first, and of course, yes, I'm sure the international schools will put in their representation and ask a question that, we
and
are.
international sector has taken a very big chunk of education scenario, because all the big the schools which are, I can say, at high end or elite, they are all following international curriculum, and some of them are also following the parallel curriculum. If they have the national curriculum, they also do have the international curriculum. So how are they going to manage? It's a big question.
Okay. So finally, Mr. Rathor, again, considering all this that's happening in the government sector as well, so how do you suggest that the NEP, what should be the way forward from the government side in terms of implementation of this? How detailed should the things be? Because there seems to be a lot of confusion, as we heard from the international thing, and we're looking at how the government school sector needs to be fixed. The private schools want more liberty. Private schools are asking for, can you give us a return on capital? Let the free market competition come in. Do you see NEP as a document, since it's been created mostly in isolation in an office in Delhi, as opposed to, I don't see a lot of practical practitioners being involved. I don't think anybody in this panel or going forward in the next 3 days, anybody's been involved in the policy making, which is a serious problem, because you see things only from a narrow bureaucratic point of view. How do you see the NEP play out in the coming months? Do you see, we are already seeing implementation documents, that's fair, but do you see it addressing this diverse country in its proper way, or do you think it's going to be a one size fits all for everybody, and then states fighting, just like what happened to the mother tongue, where Tamil Nadu was all up and against that? You're trying to spread Hindi in our state, and then the center backed off. Do you see these kind of tussles happening with international schools, with private schools happening, or do you think it's going to be a smoother rollout? Because I don't think there has been a reach out for the private sector as of now, but do you see it happening?
Sorry to interrupt. I have a hard stop, so I'll just say goodbye. Thank you very, very much to the organizers for having me. Thanks, Amol, a lot, and all the panelists. Great interaction. Thanks.
Thank you.
So, Amol, what we all knows, education is a state subject, and whatever policies central government drafts, every state has to formulate their own policies to implement in their own states. So this is a big question, and I have big doubts which state will implement the same thing what central government has created. Same kind of document, I think, would not be adopted by all the states. One thing. Second thing.
No, that's simple. Whichever states are governed by the central government party are going to implement it. And everybody else is going to oppose it for the sake of opposition, right? That's how.
So there's a big question. Same kind of implementation mechanism, same kind of quality, same kind of structure we are going to have in all the states. One thing. Second thing, I want to touch the point what you asked from Roshan, whether we are looking for more support from the government after this NEP. See, what support we are getting from the government, I'm not aware. I think that there's no support from the government. Even the government is here to create the problems for the private players.
Income tax exemption for trust and societies. I think that's the only thing.
So what I feel, one thing what Anil Swarup sir was pointing out in his address in the morning, this private school sector should be put in the for-profit, one thing. Second thing, let the government school teachers given the duty of elections, then Pulse Polio Abhiyan and census and all these government clerical jobs, what they are doing at least for 6 months in a year, at least more than 6 months in a year, they're not actually teaching the student in the school. And all the private government schools are given to the people like you and me to operate. And I'm sure we can operate government school at much lesser per student cost what government is spending in government schools. One thing. And we can produce better students. We can deliver better education in government school if we are given this opportunity. So this is the kind of things I always suggest, or I always propose. I don't know when we will see all in the coming time. So this is the thing. Government should, the role of the government and the education department of the state government, central government should be to look after the outcome of the education, not to regulate, not to operate, not to create hurdles for the private players.
Okay. Reekrit, yeah, just quick answer since we're almost short of time. Do you see this idealistic scenario emerge? We seem to be going in the opposite direction when it comes to everyday policies, announcements by the schools. I know the Punjab and Haryana High Court is, I think half the time they're just fighting cases between the schools and the parents associations
Yeah,
for
yes.
right. So how do you see it? Do you see this kind of idealistic thing? And Mr. Swaroop, whenever he talks about any idea to be implemented, he uses the word it should be politically acceptable. The word for-profit education sounds like a dirty word, for example. And secondly, I think isn't this whole scenario just a question of people not doing what they're supposed to? If it's for-profit models, we've seen people fleecing it. That's where his word of education mafia, where individuals are trying to take advantage of the system, the loopholes. Teachers in the government schools are taking advantage of lack of accountability. On the other hand, so as a country, we've not behaved very responsibly when it comes to education, that the government can give freedom to teachers to teach the way they want, or private players to run the schools they want. So that lack of discipline from everybody, I'm not talking about just the private players, isn't that been a problem in education? The educators have not used that power responsibly. In Delhi, for example, the monopoly that schools have in terms of their, because you can't open more schools in the city like Delhi, and they increase the fee by 40% a year, which leads to fee controls and everything. So do you see that as a problem going forward? Do you see this vision of that Mr. Rathor is talking about happening? Because I don't see it being politically acceptable. Or do you think that you wish the NEP had something on these lines, which could, at least as Chandra was saying, that if it's putting us all in the direction, and he could also show that, see, this is the intent that we need to go forward. But do you see that as a missed opportunity, or do you see it's something that's not going to happen so easily?
Right. It's a wonderful question that you asked as well, and plus you've given some of the answers in the question itself. So
Yeah, I have my own opinions. I couldn't resist from sharing that.
Absolutely fine. So I mean, I couldn't really listen to Mr. Swaroop when he spoke when he spoke in morning time, because then I joined, in a bit late. But when he refers to the term mafia, I would take that with a pinch of salt, because when he was the coal secretary in the ministry of, if I'm right, I think Ministry of Coal, he came up with this term called the coal mafia as well. And then particularly when he shifted to the education industry, I think that that term particularly followed him over there. And there was an instance just a few weeks ago, like in a state where a minister referred to educationists as mafia. So I think it's a trend that's picking up in terms of calling educationists mafia, which
It's not followed him.
I would be happy to be.
It's not followed him. He's been using it repeatedly, and he
Yes, he has
says
been
that
using
my
it
intention
repeatedly.
is not for good players. There are people who are, running these shadow colleges. But unfortunately, I've been trying to explain that to him, that that word is picking up, and somehow
The
it's
word
being
is picking
applied to
up,
the
yes.
private sector. Because that's when I first heard that, I was very upset. How dare
I
you
was
call the
upset,
private
yes.
sector education mafia? We've given our lives to this sector.
Very,
So
very
I think
true,
it was
very
something
true.
which maybe was intentional, maybe is good for media headlines, but it's somehow he has been propagating, and it's caught on. So yeah, please carry on.
Yeah, I mean, there is, of course, and like, and I think that even if education institutions are run by businessmen, I do not see the fault in that. I mean, like if you look at the education industry in different parts of the world as well, it's an open regulated industry. I mean, it is of course regulated, but is still open. And I I think as I said in the first round of questions as well, that that India needs to open at least around 50 to 100 schools every week, in order to in order to catch up to the trend of education. I mean, like there are millions of students that are about to enter the K-12 education system in the country, and unfortunately we do not have the infra to enroll those students. Now, around 50% of the schools in India are private schools, and they cater to a population which out of the 185 million students, so they cater to roughly around a little lesser than even half of the school going students in India. So this particularly just goes to show that that the private sector is the saving grace of the K-12 education industry in India, at least. Now, when it particularly comes to higher education, I would say that the government's doing a much better job than they are doing, at least in K-12. Now, when you've got to open hundreds of schools every month, you cannot do it by yourself. You have to get investors. And now, particularly, uh, a lot of us on this panel then we into school franchising too, and we've just entered that last year. You understand that it takes roughly anywhere between around 10 to 15 CR to set up a world-class K-12 school. It is not easy, and it can particularly not be done by you like a single investor as well. So you particularly got to have a group of investors, or you've got to have someone with a very sound financial background. So someone would be into business, someone would be into politics, and so on and so forth. So when you're scaling away these investors by the particular regulation that you have, that's doing more harm to the education industry than helping it. So you've got all of these vague requirements. So you've got like as you just said, there are income tax exemptions which we have, but in the guise of income tax exemptions, you're actually chokeholding the particular investors who have invested money. Now, running a school does require money. It isn't a charity. If you see, despite the EWS quotas that you have in various schools, it still requires a lot of money, because you particularly got to get the best faculty. You've got to market the school well. You've got to make sure that the pedagogy is up to mark, and then you've got to make sure that the tech is there as well. And on top of that, you've got a massive infra cost, which takes years to recuperate. So I think the government has to be a little transparent about this. Otherwise, then like if you want to call the educationist mafia, then then you've got to form some sort of a nexus with the educational mafia and allow us to function as well. Then, so it will take time, but I think this is the right opportunity for the government to recognize the role of the private sector, because during the pandemic, it is not the government schools, it is the private schools that have actually given free education when parents haven't paid fees. We have not fined the parents. We have allowed them to continue. We have allowed the kids' education to continue non-stop. It is mandatory in the states in North India. Then I wouldn't particularly say that I know much about the South in this case. But in North India, it's compulsory to pay 100% salaries while taking a tuition fee, which in many cases is just half of the full fee amount. So it's impossible to imagine how private schools can function. Now, those schools that have not merged their fees, right? If you can just imagine the kind of financial crunch that they're facing, they are debt-ridden, and I think a lot of them are going under as well. But the government needs to understand that every regulation, every law that it passes affects thousands of schools, lakhs of parents, tens of lakhs of students, and who is thinking about the teachers? No one is thinking about the teachers.
Thank you so much, Reekrit. I think the end you've highlighted a lot of pain points, and I think the APAC conference is going on for 3 days. I think there will be more deliberations on this front, because I think you've rightly pointed out the teachers and educators have done a fantastic job. Teachers who are working with less salary, working from home. Their parents themselves, they have a role of teaching children and ensuring their own children are getting educated. Their daughter-in-laws at home, wives at home, less salaries. Schools are struggling with how to manage with less fee and how to ensure salaries. So I think it's been a commendable role that the private sector has played. Everybody, right from teachers to educators, and a big salute to everybody who's still there and taking that responsibility of ensuring that children are learning even though buildings are closed. I think that's been something great. And I believe with this kind of dynamism, and I think as Roshan pointed out right at the beginning, that this is the NEP forms a roadmap going ahead for all of us. I believe there are some shortcomings. I hope those shortcomings will be addressed. because the intent is good. That's the best thing about the NEP. Its heart is in the right place, even though we still have doubts on its execution. So I hope going forward, this document will lead to a brighter future for this country. Thank you everybody for being a part of this panel, and thank you APAC for inviting us. I enjoyed having this discussion.
Thank you very much
truly,
for wonderfully moderating discussion. Very critical discussion that has come up, and a line coming up from Mr. Rathor that the private school would be producing better students, and a very critical discussion that happened even from Reekrit. A lot of comments. Of course, very good challenges have been discussed. I'm sure policymakers would take it into consideration.